So in this film we're looking at a fine art portrait shoot of a young girl in studio, and I just want to give you kind of some of the ingredients that I'm looking at when I'm beginning to create or getting ready for the shoot. So as far as the client is concerned, obviously when we're booking them in, we pretty much know and we've discussed the kind of clothing to bring in with them, the kind of things that we're going to be shooting during the session, and then obviously things like the styling of the shoot, kind of what it's going to look like. I'm pretty much a black and white photographer, even though we're also going to see some color images within the shoot as well today. We're going to be looking at the styling as far as the accessories that we're going to be using, the background, what the client has brought to the table as well as the post-production in the kind of the finishing. Now I'm fully aware that as far as when we look at the images, that some of these are going to look a little bit black to you, or dark I should say, but of course it's all down to my styling rather than yours. Okay, so that's what we're kind of looking at. Lighting wise, pretty much the majority is being kept to one big light source. This enables the big softbox to just kind of wrap around the subject. We're using a studio flat, so a big polystyrene flat, which is painted white on one side, black on another, which is just out of shot on the majority of images. But in fact we'll see it at some of the time being used as not only a reflector, but we're going to be seeing the kind of it appears in some of the photographs as either a wall or as a background. So watch out for those, and we'll explain that as we're going through it. We're obviously going to touch on the cropping and how I kind of like to at times get in quite tight on the image, cropping through the likes of the head or through the accessory to actually kind of bring dynamic, as well as we're going to talk about a little bit of the negative space around the whole image itself. So it's not often I get to look at the finished images with you and kind of talk about what the ingredients are. So this is a perfect opportunity to obviously see what a client would see as well. Expression, when I'm working in fine art, it tends to be a little bit more on the kind of the Mona Lisa rather than the big ass smile. But again, we might have a little bit of chuckling, a little bit of fun going through, whether it's going to find itself in the viewing room or not. That's really down to my choice. Posing wise, pretty much looking at the animation of body shape, feet position, hand position. Very rarely will the hands come from either behind the back or in front, so they'll very rarely come up towards the shoulders or near the hair and so on, because obviously the hand will compete. And then we're going to be looking at things like the backgrounds, which are going to be a old master background, a flowered wall, a white wall, which is the kind of pop-up polystyrene background, not pop-up, sorry, but a polystyrene panel, and as well as the black covered polystyrene as well. And of course what you're going to see is pretty much no props within the shoot except for a little pedestal to just actually use as kind of the sit-in and the animation. So let's get into the analysis of the images and start to talk about what makes them special to me and what makes them special to hopefully make the client buy. So these four images here are probably a true representation of this kind of fine art mini session that I do. And if we start with the image on the left hand side, we can obviously see that there's some styling going on. So these are basically all props within studio, or props that the client would bring in themselves. What we're actually looking at is one of our custom made tulle dresses, designed as a bit of a kind of a grab top as far as the across the top of the body to actually hide all obviously the bust area, and just kind of creating this lovely little ball gown kind of effect, great for if they're spinning around or jumping around and things really as well. But again, really a bare shoulder styling of photography. One light again, and again when we start to look through these images we'll kind of unravel the onion as it were, so unravel everything about it. Next image then is exactly the same kind of styling, except we've added in our feather collar now. And the feather collar is available in different kind of colours and styles that we have here in studio, but it's great to actually instantly go from a bare shoulder effect into a little bit more kind of dressy, so kind of almost a bridesmaid kind of fantasy styling of photography, except obviously we're not doing anything really with the hair except as the client styles it themselves. One light again, separation light, doesn't need to be used here because we're using a very, very big softbox within the environment, so it can spill naturally onto the old master background behind. Next image though, girls' tutu, and then as far as the headdress is concerned, we encourage the client to actually bring in their own. Again, one light again, but a little bit more of a smaller light source, a little bit more directional, as you can see from the shadowing on the face, but it is directed, so it will spill onto the background as well. And as far as the depth of field, you can see that we're using a very, very shallow depth of field in all of our photography. Usually I'm shooting on an 85mm prime lens, and anything from f4 to 2.8. With something like the 3/4 fuller length images, I can get away with 2.8, whereas if I'm closer in on the face, I need a minimum of f4 to make sure I've got the depth of field on the nose to the ear sharpness. Slight little bit of post-production styling going on here with a muted colour, but still, again, a beautiful, pretty little kind of environment. Last image then couldn't be any simpler. This is going back to little tutu dresses that we have here, little mini skirt kind of things, just to actually hide obviously the girl's pants, and then we're using the collar again to basically disguise it, give it a little bit more that ballerina three-dimensional kind of look. Bigger light source, but now positioned at the 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock position to give a little bit more shadowing while still allowing the light to spill onto the wall. Dark corners are being applied just with actually that little bit of vignetting in the post-production before being processed. So let's look at these 4 different styles of imagery in a little bit kind of closer detail. So these first 2 images, again, chosen using the kind of feather collar. Very beautiful light. I would kind of a little bit more kind of going towards a Renaissance or a Rembrandt lighting quality. Not really using any secondary light for separation, just allowing light to spill onto the old master background. One of the great things about using these kind of old master painted backgrounds is that if we leave a kind of a lighter, brighter grey or lighter area in the middle, it naturally allows for the image to be separated and not get distracted away from the background itself. You can tell here that the top of the head is being lit, so that usually gives you an idea of the height of the light. In this case, it is quite high, and obviously kind of then move into a direction to fall across to give the natural shadowing of the nose. And you'll also see on the likes of the shadowing on the arm on the image on the right hand side to give you an idea of kind of the light position and how it all works together. In the introduction, I mentioned about the likes of expression, really looking for this kind of enigmatic, simple kind of expression, a timeless one instead of the big smile. It doesn't mean that during the session I won't be getting good expression or big expression, but I'm just trying to minimize it to maximize the actual fine art feel. Obviously, as far as the composition is concerned, we're allowing quite a lot of space around these images to allow them to be naturally kind of framed. Possibly a slight trimming off on the top of both of these photographs, around about 1 inch as far as what you're looking at now, but it all depends on the format the client is buying for the wall. We're not really looking at selling just one wall image, of course. We're looking to sell multiple wall art, so hence either a variety in the same style, as far as a variety of kind of closeness, expression, lighting, position, body, pose, etc., or to actually choose from the different elements, the different 3 styles out of the 4 that we're doing during the course of the actual shoot. So again, big soft box positioned off to the 9 o'clock position, quite high as well to actually create the shadowing, and then obviously all the kind of the post production to bring in the basic the detailing for anything that might have been burnt out. Okay, so in here we can see from the image on the right hand side that we're just using a wooden floor as the kind of the background instead of actually going through a kind of cloth or whatever. We're using one of our simple kind of created trunks that we make, posing tubs, which are used throughout most of our photography, but these are great in size and shape and positioning for us to be able to actually use them to either in a high position, sit-in position, or actually in the case of the left-hand image, a slightly lower one to be able to use for the client to be able to just actually lean onto. With the image on the left hand side, when the body and the figure is turned towards the light source, you can see there is a flattening of the body shape. This is because obviously the light has nothing to create shadow with as it bounces off to the chest. So it's always better, like with all women, doesn't matter what age they are, to turn the bodies away from the light source. We get more texture, more detail, and the shadow will create some kind of little shaping of the bust and things really. But you can see from both of the images the face is being turned more towards the light source than away from the light source. This is to ensure that we've got an illumination throughout this image, so not going to be as dark as we'll see as we go through the photographs. So again, minimize what the hands are doing, try and avoid for them being too close to the camera position, especially if we're going to be showing full backs of the hand. Better to show a slight siding of the hand, or kind of rotating the cuff just to actually minimize the shaping. A little bit more expression on the full length image though, and very, very cute. Next shot here, in fact, we're showing now the polystyrene flat on the right hand side that was in position in the last images we saw, but out of shot, whereas now this is being brought in to create a little bit of a wall effect, to be able to almost fake a lean against, and obviously to add the natural reflection onto the shadow inside of the face. Especially when we look at the image on the right hand side, the reflector panel, this big polystyrene is reflecting the light onto the shadow side of the face, and if we turn that reflector panel to the opposite side, which is black, the right hand side of the face that we're seeing detail on now would become significantly black, because it would not only be subtracting the light, but it would actually be pushing almost a subtraction fully, so no reflection at all, killing the light source. Whereas you can see the brightness as she turns her head in towards the light source with the image on the left hand side. Here now, on the left-hand image, you can just see that the polystyrene flat has been turned to the black side. Now it's killing the light source. She's slightly away from it as well, so there's no kind of bounce light going on. The light has been moved from, say, the 9 o'clock position towards the 10 o'clock position more, or a smaller light source like a strip box could be used to minimize the spill onto the shadow side of the face. Now you can see here it's quite dark, which means there's a smaller light source going on, or it's kind of being shielded, so more of a feather of the light source. But that black flat is subtracting much of the light and not allowing anything to bounce in a small or a large studio space. Again, you can see here how the wooden floor complemented with the old master background kind of works well. The natural shadowing coming from the feet as it drifts across will create this lovely kind of three-dimensional, even though it's quite a low-key, strong dynamic image in its own right. If anything, I suppose, if we were looking specifically at the image on the right-hand side, you could say that the face is too dark on the shadow side, and that the hand most visible to the camera, we're seeing the full flat of the hand here, and because it's not hidden behind any of the netting, the tooling of the skirt, it's begin to obviously become dominant, and it becomes an ugly element within the image. For me to actually have some quite dark images amongst the shoot, I'm okay, but again, it's about balancing the variety during the whole shoot itself. So again, once we turn the body away from the light, like you can see the image on the left hand side, we create that shadow, but by turning the body or the face towards the light source, we can create more detail there straight away, as you can see from the image on the right hand side. But remember, as we turn the body into the light and not just the face, you start to actually flatten the whole body and the bust. So once we're back into the traditional lighting, the big light source, again turning the head towards the light, using the hands in the cross position, the prayer-like position here, you can see how the body, even though it's straight onto the camera, it's creating a three-dimensional bust through the shadowing. But you can also see the dynamic change of the image from the right-hand photograph. When we're turning the back away from the camera position, so I should say when we're turning the back towards the camera position, but we're turning the face back towards us. For me, that's probably, these two images kind of sum up the whole kind of element of this part of the shoot before we actually start to put on the collar. So image one, light towards the left hand side, some of the light spilling onto the background, crossing of the hands in the prayer, the styling of the tulle skirt, as you can see, being used as the dress across the actual bust to actually hide the torso, specifically the nipple, and actually as an older child we have to actually be more sensitive to obviously the body, whereas the image on the right hand side, we've still got the styling running all the way through here, except now we're turning the back to the camera position, the hands are being hidden behind, so we get that lovely kind of fine art level. Once we introduce the feather collar, you can see though how once we kind of put that in place, all of a sudden we bring more and a different styling in towards the image. And these feather collars do remind me of many bridesmaids' dresses that I photographed throughout the years. And again, as you can just see through the actual feather collar itself, there's a little bow on the child's kind of little vest that she's wearing below the actual dress itself. Nice simple expression. For me, the image on the left hand side just has a little bit too much of a smile, whereas the image on the right hand side has this more Renaissance portrait fine art level and things really. For me though, to kind of take this right hand image up another gear would be to actually hide the hands away to, behind the back itself. They're just a little bit distracting. Shot here then, I think these two images are absolutely glorious, and ones that the client bought. And as far as the image on the left hand side, I personally prefer that with a slight more shadowing. And again, I like the way that the fingers are playing with the actual ribbon on the feather collar as instructed. But the image on the right hand side still has a very similar expression, but because of the turn of the head towards the light source now, it just begins to feel a little bit more kind of forced and unnatural. Quick change of clothes into the client's tutu, and then bringing back the white box to use as a bit of a pose-in tub here, shoot in the full length to allow lots of space around it, so it would fit into one of our classical kind of framing. And as far as the colour tone, just actually done in the post-production, in the preset in RAW, just to actually mute the colour a little bit more and to add a slight more contrast in. And this kind of just gives a secondary feel to the shoot, and when the client is viewing them, it kind of stands up by themselves. I am predominantly a black and white photographer, as I mentioned, but it doesn't mean I don't shoot colour. It just depends on how we're putting it through. What I would probably do here on hindsight now, especially looking at onto this screen, I'd probably go into the hair and just add a little bit more detail in with the adjustment brush in the RAW, just to actually bring a little bit more detail through the shadow area. But once again, you can see here, as I turn the body in towards the light source, it fully flattens the bust and creates no shadowing or shaping, and would be better if we turn the body away, like we can see here, even though we've used the exaggeration of the shadowing on the face with the black flat being used, and the positioning of the softbox to dynamically change the shadow on the face. But all I've done differently on the image on the left to the image on the right is the image on the left, the body is slightly turned away, so is the face, and where the image on the right hand side, the face is turned a little bit more round towards the light source, allowing that little bit of Rembrandt kind of triangle of light on the shadow eye to kind of come alive. Next shots here, again, brighter, and because of the bigger softbox being used and obviously the lighter background. Still looking at the f4 on the image on the right hand side, but in fact the image on the left hand side is being shot at 2.8 now. One of the benefits of using the Cleghorn system is that I can quickly change the power of the main light by just a couple of clicks of a button. But if I wanted to swap just quickly in aperture, using just the camera adjustments instead of flash adjustments, the quickest way for me to do that is for setting up the scene where I need f4 of using the likes of 200 ISO, whereas I could use f4 at 200 ISO, yep. And then if I want to shoot at 2.8, all I've got to do is drop my ISO to 100, and then obviously I can instantly change my aperture, because flash, remember, is not like daylight where I can't just adjust the shutter speed. I have to adjust the actual aperture to change the actual exposure, and hence I have to balance the two to keep the correct exposure with changing both the shutter speed and changing both the aperture and the actual ISO to maintain that drop in focus. So again, hands just actually using simple kind of animation, simple kind of classic posing, specifically moving the front arm and hand across to the body towards the other side. We can see how the shaping of the light now is creating a three-dimensional shadow on the body, creating a small little bust there, and creating much more of a classic fine art, painterly style within the image itself. Finally then, finishing off with a little tutu skirt, as I mentioned about. Still the child has got like a little boob tube running across. If the client hasn't come in with something I should say, to actually hide the likes of the bust, then we can just turn the collar round like I've done here, which the opening is now on the back instead of at the front. So it means that we can just twist the collar around straight away if the client didn't come with a vest. And as long as we didn't have a developed bust with an older child, we could actually use the collar as just to actually hide the top part of the figure. So this is just the reflector panel being used now as a background. But obviously if I didn't have one of these reflector panels that I've made up, I could use the likes of a white wall in exactly the same way. So that's it, a little bit of a look behind the scenes of a fine art shoot and the variety that I take as well in this simple kind of child photography. And we've been looking at the styling, the lighting, the cropping, the expression, the posing, the backgrounds, the props, the camera setting. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.